Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the nation at 8 p.m. tonight on South Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This follows a special sitting of cabinet that considered recommendations of the National Coronavirus Command Council meeting. Meanwhile, there's been a huge increase in new COVID-19 infections in South Africa. The country has recorded 4,173 new coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of infections to 796,472. Now, the health department says 65 more people have died from COVID-19 related complications. This puts the national death figure at 21,709. Of those, 4 are in the Eastern Cape, 15 are in the Free State, 4 in Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal has 12 and the Western Cape 30. Meanwhile, the department is concerned about the spike of coronavirus cases in Buffalo City as well as the Nelson Mandela Bay metros, who are all in the Eastern Cape. Now, the President, as we said, is expected to address the nation on the national government's interventions to combat the surge of COVID-19 cases in the parts of South Africa. The President is likely to announce a number of interventions, in particular with the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, with both provinces, having seen spikes in new COVID-19 infections. Now, to discuss the possible impact these measures might have, especially in the restaurant sector, we are joined via Skype by Restaurant Association of South Africa CEO Wendy Alberts. Wendy, welcome to SA Today. Thank you for joining us. Just in reading that intro, you must be worried.
Absolutely. The associate is going to argue any type of lockdown or restrictions that is placed on the restaurant industry. We want to see the scientific evidence that we are indeed a responsible spreader of the COVID virus. What we do know is through these last months, there's not been one single authority who has come into our restaurants who has taken the registers that is mandatory for us to complete and use it for contact tracing. And neither has any one of the authorities come back to us where there's been reported COVID to let us know that a particular patron who has been in our establishment has got COVID for us to close down, sanitize, or do the necessary isolations. So we're certainly calling for that evidence to say if there's a curfew that is set or liquor restrictions are put within the restaurant industry, that's certainly going to curb the slowdown of the coronavirus. What we have learned is...
Yes, Wendy, I was just about to say, before we get into possibly, because I see you want to break down some of the numbers for me, before we get to that, we know how the industry has suffered, in particular with the hard lockdown. I mean, surely some of your businesses, some of your associates are still not up. Some of them will never come back to the industry because of what the hard lockdown has done for them, to them rather. So any form of lockdown pertaining to the hospitality industry, tourism as well, takes a knock-on effect. And as I hear you, you will not take it laying down.
Absolutely. The lockdown will be disastrous to the industry, let alone to the economy. And government should have played a more vital role and a more urgent role than placing urgency on the 11th hour now to try and curb the spread of COVID when it's in the peak of the holiday season. We need to be responsible individuals. We need to work as collectors. We need to work as industry. We need to work as corporates. And we need to work as government by allowing people to take responsibilities, making informed decisions, and making the decision whether or not they can safely go to an establishment and whether they're at risk or not. The part for us that is questioning at all times is if patrons were so concerned that they were getting COVID within our establishments, they wouldn't be supporting our establishments. Not once through lockdown have we received any compensation, rebates, or any type of relief from government in any way whatsoever. We haven't received any relief from landlords, from the banks, from our suppliers. Even our suppliers have blacklisted restaurants from obtaining supply in order to continue to trade their businesses. And the one part of industry that has supported us is the consumer and our patrons. And if they were concerned about COVID being transmitted in our restaurants, we certainly would not see them returning to our restaurants. And we are saying again that the lockdown will be disastrous on our industry. And we certainly hope that the interventions that the President is going to discuss is going to be one that's not going to put further pressure on the industry or on the economy. Because this lockdown is going to drive the business that we are currently looking forward to obtaining underground to illegal parties, to house parties, and to gatherings. And what we have learned about the coronavirus is that it is afraid of the 3 Cs. Close contact, confined spaces, and obviously crowded places. And by putting the lockdown in place, it's going to encourage people to take their parties elsewhere where there is not social distance, sanitization and protocols that are followed. We, at least within the industry, can certainly safely deploy these initiatives and ensure that the safety of our patrons and our staff are adhered to.
With that said, Wendy, I'm sure you'd sit in there and I understand your concern, but also government is saying we've got a pandemic on our hands. We've seen how the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, they hold about 70% of, well, just last night, from the 4,100 odd numbers of infections, they came from the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. The Garden Route area, we know that it's also become somewhat of a second wave hit in that area. So governments have got a point, though, to try and nip it in the bud, wouldn't you say?
I think government also needs to be transparent with the scientific evidence, and secondly, the recovery rate. So what is the recovery rate currently taking place within our country? We need to balance lives and livelihoods, and I have a great respect. We are certainly not COVID experts. But what we should have been doing in the 3 months that we've been in a relaxed lockdown is we should have been working close with the experts and the COVID specialists to look at interventions to protect our industry and to protect the economy. Because we have got two distinct, different elements that are happening. And one is we've got COVID. And if this is COVID related, let's stick to the facts, let's get the scientific evidence, let's get the data, let's get the proper statistics. And if we're dealing with social behavioral issues, then government needs to look at that completely differently. Because by putting us into further lockdown and further restrictions, it's just going to put more people off the balance sheet, which is going to put people into a state of depression, which is going to teach them to behave more badly and make more desperate measures in looking at alternative ways to keep themselves occupied because they have no sense of purpose to work. So we certainly have tried very hard. We've been isolated on our own to come to a place where we've recovered the industry. We have had to, on our own, look for mechanisms and initiatives to rebuild our industry without the help of government. And when a sense of urgency brings the impossible to us, and with a flash of a one, they decimate our industry once again, I think it's very irresponsible on government. In actual fact, it's inhumane, because it means thousands of more people are going to be left without jobs, and hundreds of more restaurants are going to be left without doors ever opening within the season. We've held out, we are looking forward to it, we have prepared ourselves adequately, we've got all the protocols, and until that they can prove that COVID is spread within our establishments, we are going to argue the lockdown and the liquor restrictions.
We spoke to the somebody representing the National Liquor Council yesterday, and they too were pretty adamant that, look, as much as they do not want the hard lockdown or any form of lockdown to return, in particular because this is a time for them and yourselves, I assume, to recover from what has happened over the past 8 months. Unfortunately, consumer acts, or the way consumers would behave, would bear testimony to what government will announce as well. If your consumers act right, then there won't be a need to go that route by government. That's what they would argue.
Look, we've applied ourselves and we've said over the last months that we need to do everything to find initiatives that will work through COVID. And, we needed to be collaborating with government. We needed to be consulted with government. So to make decisions on our behalf by putting our businesses back into distress and putting pressure back onto our industry and forcing more job losses without there being a resource plan is irresponsible on their part. There is not sufficient funding, let alone in the industry, to support the unemployment that we've currently got. We can't even get answers from the Department of Home Affairs on when they're going to pay our foreign nationals. We can't even get timeliest payments out of UIF and TERS. And there's been absolutely no relief from any one of the private sector banking institutions, lending houses, loans, landlords, suppliers, or anybody. We've had to rebuild the industry single-handedly on our own with the help of the consumer and our patrons. And again, I'm saying it again, if they felt that they were in any type of harm or danger, they would not be frequenting our establishment. So I think government really needs to look at different interventions other than putting a stress on the economy and stress on our industry, because there will be no recovery from this place if they don't work closely with us in terms of rebuilding.
Yeah, Wendy Alberts, Restaurant Association of South Africa, CEO, thank you very much for speaking to us. I know we jumped the gun for now. The President has not made any pronouncement, but I'm sure he's sitting there and listening, whatever comes your way. Wishing you the best of luck as well.